Hello everyone, welcome back to Coding with Mock. And in this video, we'll be having a look at interactions with the previous commits. These interactions will be handy for either reverting your files to a previous version of your project or to see where the differences between different versions of your projects are. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would I want to see the difference between two particular versions? Well, it could be really handy for bug tracking reasons. Let's say that you're working on a project with your colleagues, and you're going along, coding, and all of a sudden one of your users comes back and says, well, if I do action A and then proceed to action B and followed up by action C, my program crashes or I get the wrong result because, well, it doesn't compute with business logic. Something went wrong in your application, something you didn't foresee. And that's perfectly reasonable. Programmers or developers are humans, and humans make mistakes. Now, the thing is, because that's something that a user will have to feed back to you, it might be very well possible, because of the workflow that you have, that you programmed or coded that particular piece of code 2 weeks, maybe 2 months ago. Now, that means that, and most developers don't sit still for 2 months waiting for user feedback. So it might well be that your project internally is already at version 2.7 and your user is working on 2.2. So you want to go back and see where that bug was introduced and then see where the differences lie. So that's one of the things that we will want to do. Now, okay, how are we going to go about this, and how are we going to actually fix our bug? Well, to start out with, I'm just going to describe what I've set up here. We still have our temp directory with a Git repository inside, as you can see here. So I have my test file, and I've got a .git directory, which is my repository. Just going to hide it again because we don't want to accidentally interact with it. And in my test file, I changed that a little bit from our previous example. I've added 3 lines of code. Hello world 1, hello world 2, hello world 3. And if I check my Git log here, you can see that I have 3 different commits, and I committed every line in a separate commit. Okay, just to show you what is possible. Now, let's say that our bug was introduced in commit 2, and we are currently in commit 3. I haven't done anything yet on my working tree, just double check with git status, and my working tree is clean. So basically everything as I am seeing it is the same as commit 3. Now, how can I see the differences between commit 2 and commit 3, for instance, or commit 1 and commit 3? Well, that's quite easy. We're just gonna start out with the git command, and I'm gonna ask git, show me the difference between my current working directory, and by default it's always going to use your current working status, as it were, as a baseline. And then I'm gonna say, I want Git to compare the status between current status and, let's say, commit 2. I'm going to copy the hash or part of the hash. I think the minimum that you need to copy is 5 characters. Not sure, but I think it's 5. We're going to copy those over, and I'm going to ask it to show me all the differences. Now, I only have 1 file, and I could just ask it to show me the differences in this file. I'm going to ask it to show me the differences in the complete project by just mentioning, okay, show me the differences by using the dot operator here. enter. And now it's going to show me all the differences between my current working directory, or actually the last commit, and the commit I mentioned in the command, right? So here's the command. I asked him here, show me the difference between what is here now and what was there then. Now, as you can see, apparently the difference is that I added line 3 here, hello world 3. It's color coded in green, and it also has this little plus sign because this was added, right? So that's how that works. This is how you can show the differences between your current working directory and your and a previous commit. Okay, now let's say that our problem arose not in commit 2, but in commit 1. Or sorry, it arose in commit 2, and in commit 1 it wasn't there yet. So I actually want to be checking the difference between commit 1 and commit 2. Commit 2 and commit 3 both have the bug, so I can't really narrow it down. If I show the difference between commit 3 and commit 1, I might get a lot of differences. And you need to remember, I'm doing this with a really empty repository. If you're doing this with a real repository, you might have 50, 100 files, and over the course of, let's say, 10 commits, you'll have a lot of differences there. So you want to be able to narrow it down. Narrowing it down will be easy if you know how to use the diff command. Now I already shown you how to show you the diff between your current status and your current commit and the previous commit. Now let's see how we can show the difference between two different commits or two previous commits. We're still going to use git diff, and then I'm going to copy one commit hash, a space, and then copy the second one, dash, and I'm just going to do it for the whole project. I could also do it just for one file. And now it's going to show me the difference between commit 48D7A, that's commit 1, and commit 2BCAE, and that's going to be commit 2. So what's the difference here? Well, the difference is that in hello world line 1, that's the same in both commits, but I added hello world 2, or that line was added between those commits, right? So that's the difference there. Now, what would happen if I switched those? Hold on, let me do this. That's going to be easier. What would happen if I changed around the commits? Because that's also interesting to see. There we go. I just changed around the order of my commits. And you'll see that it shows me that this line was deleted. So it's going to be important that you know how that works if you want to work with this. Now, this will become a lot more easy to read when you're using a graphical user interfaces. This is one of the things that's easier in a GUI than on the command line. But still, I want you to learn the principles and learn the concepts of what is possible and how all of this works. Okay, so we now know how to check the differences between our current our current commit, or the last commit, and previous commits, or differences between two previous commits. Okay, now you might still be asking yourself, well, how does this help me narrow down my bug tracking? This doesn't really help you narrow it down, but it will help you identify the line of code or the lines of code that created the bug, or that caused the bug. Okay. Now, how do I narrow down my different commits? And for that, I basically have to, I need to have or need to build my application, but not in my current status. I need to go back to a previous version. Now, how can I go back to a previous version of my project? That's what I'm going to show you now. There's two ways of going about that. The first way is can only be used to actually go back and check on your project files. You can't make any changes, or you can't revert a file to a previous version with that. I'll show you that in a minute. But the first way of going back to a previous version is using the git checkout command. Git checkout. Then I want to go back to, let's say I want to go back to commit 2. Copy. Thank you. Okay. Copy the hash code and just do this, git checkout, and then the hash code, and then hit enter. Now you'll see that Git will give you a really verbose explanation of what's happening. You're switching to this commit. That's good. Now you're also entering what is called a detached head state. And we haven't talked about the head object yet in a Git repository, and we will be doing that in one of the advanced videos. Just know that you're in detached head mode and that it is meant to be it's meant to look around in the project. You can build your project and run your project. That's the idea of this detached head state. The idea is not that you change things here. It might help if you looked at Git and your Git repository as basically a history of your project. It contains all the different versions, so in essence it is a history of your project. And the designers behind Git did not want you to change history. As in real life, you can't change history. If you made a decision, you're gonna have to live with it. Same here. You can't really change history. Okay, but you can look at history and learn from your mistakes, and then move on. And in the same way, you're gonna have to use Git. So basically, what I did now was I checked out my previous version. Now I can build my project in that previous version and see if that bug exists here. If the bug exists in commit 2, then I go back to commit 1, build it again, and if it doesn't exist in commit 1, but it does exist in commit 2, then I can say for sure, okay, if I take the difference between commit 1 and commit 2, I know one of those differences will have caused my bug. Okay, so that's the way you can use this. Now, this detached head state and this checkout, what did this do to my project folder? Now my notepad, as I might have mentioned already, your notepad doesn't really show you the live status of your project. If you're using IntelliJ or Eclipse, they should. They'll either alert you to the fact that the file has changed on hard drive and you might want to refresh it, and in IntelliJ it just reloads your file automatically. Okay, but let's see what happened here. And as you can see, I checked out commit 2 and it undid all of the changes that were added in commit 3. Okay, so basically your project is now ready to be built, or you can use these files to build your project or in your application and check if the bug is still there. That's one of the ways you can use Git and going back to different versions. Okay, but remember, when you're in detached head state, the idea is that you use this to look around and not make changes that then would be in your mind retroactively applied to future commits. That does not happen. You can't change that. Now, there is a way that you can use branches to actually accomplish what you might think, but that's for another video. That would make it a little bit too complicated for now. So, we know how to show the difference. We know how to go back in history and back to a previous commit and get all of our files back to that previous commit. Now, before I go on, there's one thing I need you to take note of as well, and that's something that might not be obvious at this moment because I'm only working with one file. Let's switch back to our current commit, and we do that by using this command here, which git switch minus or dash. That will switch me back to my current commit or my last commit. So I leave detached head mode and I'm switching back to branch master, which actually means I'm going back to the last commit of my project. And if I do git status, my working tree is clean. If I open up my test file is back to hello world 3. Now let's add a new text file, new file, .txt. Let's open it up, add some garbaggio. Wow, there we go. Just a file. I added a new file. And let's do a git status. I now have my file, git add the new file .txt, and I'm gonna commit it. I'm just gonna commit number 4. There we go. My status is fine now, or should be fine. Okay. Now let's go back to our previous commit. Let's try that again. Git. And I want to go back to commit 2. Copy the hash, git checkout, and then my hash code. There we go. Now you can see that my file is gone. Okay. This new file, so if you check out, it's going to switch your whole project folder to that directory. Now, this will work for tracked files. If my file was not tracked, and let's go back, git switch, and we're going back. My new file is there. Let's say add test, and I'm gonna add a file, an untracked file, right? So my git status will reflect this. I have an untracked file. Now let's add some text to this just to make it more real. If I do a git checkout and then my hash code of commit number 2, let's see what happens. My new file .txt disappears because that file was tracked, as well does the contents of my test file, but my untracked file does not disappear. It's still there. So that's one of the things that you will need to take into account if you have untracked files in your repository. And trust me, you will have untracked files if you're working on a bigger project. This could be log files from previous runs, and so on and so on. So be careful with those files, because if you check out a previous version, those files are not affected by your checkout. Okay, so that's one thing to remember. Git switch, and we're gonna go back to our last commit, and there we go. So that's how that works. So now you know how to check the difference between different commits. And now you can also revert your project back to a previous version using the git checkout command. Okay. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is how to revert a file back to a previous commit. We've already seen different ways of doing that with a complete project, but how do I revert a file back to a previous commit? It's not something you will be using very often, but always a nice quote-unquote weapon to have in your arsenal. To revert a file back to its previous commit, we're gonna have to, well, it's kind of similar to what we've done up till now. But let's say I have my files here, I have my 4 commits, and let's say that I want to revert my test file back to the first commit. These 2 files, these 2 lines, or all the code that I committed on commit 4, 3, and 2, I want all of those changes gone, and I want to go back to commit 1 for my file. Now, the first thing you'll need is the hash of your commit. Now, let's take that hash, let's just copy it, and we'll still be using the checkout command. Then you add the hash, and then dash dash, and you add the name of the file that you want to revert back to its, well, previous commit. We hit enter, and as you might have known, my notepad doesn't reflect that yet, but if I open up my test file is back to the first commit. Now, this is not yet reflected in the Git repository, but if I check my Git status, my untracked file is still here, but you might see, or you might notice, that my test file has changed, because previously I was on a clean working tree. Now my test file has changed. It's been reverted back to this first commit status. And Git has already added the file to the staging area because it said, well, you wanted to revert this, but now you'll have to commit it manually. So what you now need to do is you'll still have to manually commit this file or your complete project. I'm doing this with just one file, but you can do it just as easily with your complete project. Commit and then fixed bug by reverting back to commit 1. There we go. Now I'm back in a clean working tree. Well, clean working tree. I have my untracked file here. I'll just ignore that for now. But my file, or multiple files, if you want to go that route, my file has been reverted back to, and my history will also reflect that. But, and that's the nice feature, you'll still have all of this history because it's part of history. You've changed the files and you added to them, and now you're reverting back to commit 1. So let's say that in future, somewhere in the future, they'll say, well, that code wasn't that bad. We just needed to add this line or just this check, and then we were fine. We can do the same that we just did with our file and actually deleted the changes of these commits. We can redo all of these changes and then add the fixes afterwards. That's also possible. Okay, so that's how you revert a file back to a previous commit. All is possible. Well, that's it for this video. In the next video, we'll round up everything that you will need to know about basic Git usage, and you should be ready to work with Git on a local level. Okay. Well, that's it for now. Be safe and see you in the next video.